The night my life went up in flames, I stood on the sidewalk in my pajamas, watching helplessly as fire devoured everything I'd worked for. My small bakery, Sweet Dreams, burned bright against the dark sky, flames licking through the windows where just hours ago, customers had pressed their faces against the glass to admire my wedding cakes. I'm Hannah Parker, and at 28, I thought I had finally made it. After years of saving every penny from my corporate job, taking night classes at culinary school, and endless hours of practice, I had opened my own bakery. It wasn't much, just a small storefront in downtown Portland, but it was mine. Or at least it had been, until an electrical fire turned my dream into ashes. "Ma'am, was anyone inside?" The fire chief's voice barely registered through my shock. "No," I managed to whisper. "I closed up early today. I was sleeping in my apartment upstairs when the alarm went off." He nodded grimly. "You're lucky you got out. The building's a total loss." Lucky. That word would come back to haunt me in the days that followed. My phone buzzed in my pocket, messages from my family pouring in as news of the fire spread. They had all seen it on social media. My little bakery's final moments broadcast live by onlookers who thought the tragedy would make good content for their feeds. "I told you this was a stupid idea." That was from my sister Diana, always the first to point out my failures. "This is what happens when you don't listen to your family." Mom, who had never supported my decision to leave my stable accounting job. "Should have stuck to spreadsheets, sis." My brother Marcus, who managed our father's successful chain of hardware stores. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I watched as firefighters battled the blaze, knowing they were fighting a losing battle. By dawn, Sweet Dreams was nothing but a charred skeleton, everything I'd built reduced to rubble and ash. The next day, standing in the ruins, reality hit hard. The insurance company called. My policy had a clause that wouldn't cover electrical fires in buildings this old. I had missed that detail, too focused on keeping the premiums low while I built my business. "Come home," my mother urged during her obligatory call. "You can have your old room back. Maybe your father will give you a job doing bookkeeping for the stores." The thought made me sick. Going back meant admitting they were right, that chasing my dreams was foolish, that I should have stayed in my safe, boring corporate job and married Brian, the accountant they tried to set me up with. "I'll figure something out," I told her. "Oh, Hannah," she sighed. "When will you learn you're not cut out for business? Some people are meant to work for others, and that's nothing to be ashamed of." But I didn't want to work for others. I wanted to create, to build something of my own. The problem was, I now had nothing. No savings, no equipment, not even a change of clothes, since my apartment above the bakery had been destroyed too. The family gathered for Sunday dinner at my parents' sprawling suburban home, a weekly tradition I usually skipped but couldn't avoid now. I felt their eyes on me as I picked at my food, their pity mixed with smugness almost tangible. "You know," Diana began, adjusting her designer watch. "I heard the Starbucks on 4th is hiring baristas. At least it would be something until you come to your senses." Marcus chuckled. "Better than burning through more money on another failed business." "That's enough," Dad said, not out of kindness, but because discussing failure made him uncomfortable. In his world, the Parker name meant success. His hardware stores were a local institution, and his children were supposed to reflect that legacy. Well, most of his children did. Diana was a successful real estate agent married to a surgeon. Marcus managed a family business, groomed to take over one day. And me? I was the disappointment who had dared to dream differently. After dinner, I escaped to the garden, seeking a moment of peace. Instead, I found my Aunt Grace, the black sheep of the family who had made her fortune in vintage clothing after everyone said she was crazy to leave her teaching job. "Quite a mess you're in," she said, patting the bench beside her. I sat down, fighting back tears. "I lost everything, Aunt Grace. The bakery, my apartment, my savings. They were right. I should have stayed in accounting." She snorted. "The only thing worse than failure is never trying. You know what I see when I look at those ruins? A mistake. Opportunity." She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo of the charred building. "Look past the damage. What do you see?" I squinted at the image, seeing only destruction. "I don't." "Look at the location, Hannah. Downtown Portland, corner lot, historic building. And now it's essentially a blank slate." I frowned. "A blank slate I can't afford to rebuild." Aunt Grace's eyes twinkled. "Maybe not alone. But I've been looking to diversify my investments. What if we turned that space into something new? Something bigger than just a bakery? Hope flickered in my chest, but doubt quickly smothered it. The family would never approve. Good thing we're not asking for their approval. She straightened her colorful silk scarf, a stark contrast to my mother's conservative pearls. Meet me tomorrow at the site. Bring any sketches, plans, or ideas you've been too afraid to share with the others. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ideas that I pushed aside as too ambitious now bubbled to the surface. Sweet Dreams had been a lovely little bakery, but it had also been safe, conventional, exactly what everyone expected from a small-town baker. But what if it could be more? I dug through my salvaged laptop, pulling up the business plans I created late at night but never dared to implement. Pages of concepts for a hybrid space, part artisanal bakery, part cafe, part cooking school. A place where people could not just buy baked goods but learn to make them, where community could gather, where creativity could flourish. The next morning, I met Aunt Grace at the burned-out building. She listened intently as I shared my vision, her eyes lighting up with each detail. This, she declared, is exactly what downtown needs, and more importantly, it's exactly what you need. But the cost, I started. Let me worry about that. She pulled out a business card, not her usual one for the vintage clothing empire, but one I'd never seen before. Ever heard of Phoenix Investment Group? I shook my head. It's my private investment company. I use it to fund projects I believe in, outside the family's knowledge or interference. And Hannah, she smiled, I believe in this. For the first time since the fire, I felt something stir in my chest. Not just hope, but determination. The family thought the fire had destroyed me, proved them right about my capabilities. They had no idea that from these ashes, something extraordinary was about to rise. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Aunt Grace's connections proved invaluable. Architects, contractors, designers, all brought in under the Phoenix Investment Group banner. The burned-out shell of Sweet Dreams was carefully demolished, making way for something new. But news travels fast in a family like ours. It didn't take long for the rumors to start. I heard Hannah's being reckless again. Diana told anyone who would listen. Taking out massive loans, trying to rebuild that money pit. Marcus cornered me at another family dinner. Dad's worried about you. This kind of debt could ruin you permanently. I just smiled and changed the subject. Let them think I was drowning in loans. Let them believe I was making another mistake. The truth would be so much sweeter when they finally saw it. The construction continued, but I wasn't idle. Aunt Grace had arranged for me to train with master bakers in France and Italy, learning techniques I'd only dreamed about before. Every night, I refined my business plan, incorporating everything I learned. This wouldn't be just another bakery. This would be a revolution. 6 months passed. The family's concern turned to condescension, then to pity. They were sure I was having some kind of breakdown, throwing good money after bad. Poor Hannah. I overheard my mother tell her friends at church. She just doesn't understand her limitations. But while they were busy feeling sorry for me, something remarkable was taking shape downtown. The old building had been transformed into a stunning 3-story space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop garden. Inside, state-of-the-art teaching kitchens were installed alongside cozy cafe spaces and a professional bakery that would put my old setup to shame. One evening, as I stood in the nearly completed space, Aunt Grace joined me. "Have you decided on a name?" she asked. I nodded, pointing to the space where the sign would go. "Rise." She smiled. "Perfect. And the opening date?" 3 weeks, I said, though the family doesn't know yet. "Oh, they know something's happening," she chuckled. "They just don't know what. Diana's been driving past twice a day, trying to figure it out. And your mother's bridge club is full of theories." I laughed, imagining their speculation. They were probably expecting another modest bakery, perhaps with a fresh coat of paint and some new equipment. They had no idea what was coming. "Are you ready for this?" Aunt Grace asked softly. "It's going to change everything." I looked around at the space that had risen from the ashes of my first dream. It was bigger, better, more ambitious than anything I dared to imagine before the fire. "You know what I realized?" I said. "That fire was the best thing that could have happened to me. It burned away all my doubts, all my attempts to play it safe and meet their expectations. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really capable of." Aunt Grace squeezed my hand. Then let's show them exactly what you can do. The next 3 weeks were a frenzy of final preparations. Staff was hired and trained, equipment was tested, and recipes were perfected. Every detail was carefully orchestrated for maximum impact. And then, finally, it was time. The morning of Rise's grand opening dawned clear and crisp. I stood in my new office, overlooking a bustling street below where a line had already begun to form. The local food blogs had been buzzing about the mysterious new establishment for weeks, though no one knew exactly what to expect. My phone buzzed, another message from my mother. Hannah, please tell me you haven't mortgaged your future on this foolish venture. It's not too late to stop. I smiled, setting the phone aside as I smoothed down my crisp chef's coat with Executive Chef and Omer, embroidered in elegant script. The family would be arriving soon for the private preview I'd arranged before the public opening. They still thought they were coming to support my desperate attempt to rebuild, a small mercy I'd allowed them to believe. They're here, my assistant Michael announced, trying to hide his grin. He'd heard enough about my family to understand the significance of this moment. I took a deep breath and headed downstairs. Through the glass doors, I could see them gathering, Mom in her pearls, Dad looking impatient, Diana and Marcus exchanging what looked like amused glances. Aunt Grace stood slightly apart, wearing a knowing smile. "Welcome to Rise," I said, opening the doors. Their reactions as they stepped inside were everything I'd hoped for. Gone was the humble storefront they remembered. In its place stood an elegant space that looked more like a high-end restaurant than a bakery. The teaching kitchens gleamed with professional equipment, the cafe area featured custom-made furniture, and the display cases showcased pastries that looked like works of art. What is this?" my mother stammered. "This," I said proudly, "is the future of culinary education and dining in Portland. Rise isn't just a bakery, it's a cooking school, an event space, and a cafe all in one. We'll offer professional certification courses, private classes, and exclusive dining experiences." I led them through the space, watching their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief. "The teaching kitchens can accommodate up to 40 students at a time," I explained. "We're already booked solid for the next 6 months. The rooftop garden supplies our cafe and provides space for private events. We have 3 wedding receptions booked for next month alone." "But how?" Diana interrupted. "This must have cost millions. 4.5 million to be exact," I said calmly, "fully funded by Phoenix Investment Group." My father's head snapped up. "Phoenix Investment, but they're one of the most exclusive private equity firms in the Northwest. They never fund startups." "And will you let them?" I thought about it. "No," I said finally. "Rise needs to succeed or fail on its own terms, not as part of the Parker family business empire." She squeezed my shoulder approvingly. "Good girl." The success of Rise exceeded everyone's expectations, even mine. Within 6 months, we had expanded our class offerings and hired more instructors to meet demand. The cafe had become Portland's hottest brunch spot, with lines forming every weekend. Our private events were booked a year in advance. 1 year after the opening, I stood in the exact spot where I had watched sweet dreams burn. The memory of that night no longer brought pain. Instead, it filled me with gratitude. That fire had destroyed my small dream only to make way for a bigger one. My phone buzzed. A message from Diana. "Just drove past Rise. Lines around the block again. Hard to believe it used to be that little bakery that burned down." I smiled, typing back, "Not hard for me to believe. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really meant to build." The next week, Food and Wine magazine released their annual 40 Under 40 list of the most influential people in food. There I was at number 5. Hannah Parker, the culinary innovator who transformed a personal tragedy into Portland's most exciting food destination. My mother called as soon as she saw it. "Darling, have you seen the article? Everyone at Bridge Club is talking about it. And to think we all thought that fire was the end for you." "It was the end," I said. "The end of playing small, the end of trying to fit into everyone else's expectations. But it was also a beginning." Rise continued to grow beyond anything I had imagined that night standing in the ashes. We opened a second location in Seattle, then a third in San Francisco. The cooking school became nationally recognized, drawing students from across the country. But my favorite moment came 2 years after the opening, when a young woman walked into my office, clutching a business plan. I lost my restaurant in a flood last month, she said. Everyone says I should give up, get a regular job. But I saw your story about how you built Rise from the ashes. I smiled, remembering another young woman standing in the ruins of her dreams, not knowing that the end of one dream could be the beginning of something far greater. Tell me about your vision, I said, pulling up a chair. As she spoke, I glanced out the window at the line of customers waiting to experience what had risen from those ashes. Sometimes the greatest success stories start with complete destruction. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out just how much you can build. And sometimes, though my family still hasn't quite figured this out, the best way to prove people wrong isn't to argue. It's to succeed so spectacularly that their doubts become the punchline to your success story. Rise stands as testament to that truth, serving up not just exceptional food, but a daily reminder that from the ashes of our greatest defeats can rise our greatest triumphs.